So would you like to introduce yourself?
Me, yeah. Hi,
Yep.
I'm Mike Finn. I'm a lecturer in History of Science at the University of Leeds, and I'm also director of the Museum of History of Science that we have in the school, and I'm also program manager for sort of an undergraduate program in philosophy, psychology, and scientific thought, and the MA program in history of science. And yeah, that's me.
So we're going to ask you a few questions so I'll get to know you a little bit.
Sure. Do you guys introduce yourselves too? Or?
Yeah, we can. So I'm Emily. I'm a second year philosophy and history of science student.
Hi.
And I am Dave. I am a third year ancient history and history student. So yeah, that's us.
Our first question is, how did you get into your subject area and what about it interests you?
Yeah, I think I'll instantly spoil the kind of the mystique of the interview that you sent the questions in advance, so I had a chance to think about this. Yeah, it reminded me that when I had my PhD viva, they kind of asked me this question, like, why are you interested in this subject? And I didn't have an answer at the time. I'm like, I don't know, it was just what my PhD is about. And so I had to think back a bit more, because I know I've spoken with friends who kind of say, you don't choose the subject chooses you. And I'm not sure if that's quite right, but I think I've kind of always been interested in science. And like when I was at A level, I didn't do history, but I was like going to university to do science. And the only kind of encounter I'd had with history of science was like popular science books, like Brief History of Time and Fermat's Last Theorem by Simon Singh, which I liked, and my friend recommended I read them at the time. But then I kind of forgot about it, and then I went to university and I was doing natural sciences, and my plan was to focus on physiology. That's what I really liked, which is when you first start doing physiology, it's a lot of like dissecting frogs and things, and then if you go really further down the line, it's just kind of adding calcium to petri dishes to see how it affects cells and things. So it gets really boring, and I realized that wasn't for me. So I took in my second year a history of science module and really loved it, and thought, okay, well, there's a choice to specialize on this in my final year. So I had a sort of temporary personal tutor at the time. So this is the problem with personal tutors, who was a scientist and thought history of science was a waste of time, and he tried to discourage me from doing it, like, don't waste your life and your career by doing some pointless subject. I ignored him and did it anyway, and then I just kind of loved it in my third year as an undergraduate, like having these sort of interesting lectures and writing essays every week and having supervisions in the pub and all that kind of thing. It was brilliant. And so I then decided I was going to do it as a master's at Leeds, but I took a gap year because I didn't have funding. And then, yeah, all of my friends from uni moved to London, but I decided I'm going to go to Leeds and do history of science. So I came here. I kind of wanted to work on Erasmus Darwin, I don't know if that's a figure you guys have heard of before. So it's Charles Darwin's granddad. I was really interested in like scientific poetry in the 18th century. But when I arrived in Leeds, discovered that the person who was an expert in that had just left. So instead, Greg Raddick, who you've interviewed already, I think, said to me, well, you liked physiology, how about looking into that instead? And so that's how I ended up working in history of medicine and psychiatry. And yeah, but it sort of just came from sort of being interested in physiology in the first place. I think when I did science, I was never very interested in doing it myself in the lab, but I was more interested in reading how people did it in the past, how the experiments were first sort of performed, or how they developed over time. So I think that was what led me into it. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. That was garbled. Yeah.
I think a lot of people sort of find their way to history of science through science, it seems, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely. It's what do people? Someone said to me that history of science is a home for waifs and strays. It's like if you you like studying, but you don't quite fit into the field where you start off from. It's a welcoming field, but also I guess throughout most of its sort of existence over the last 100 years, history of science has been a field that just takes from other disciplines. Like we steal from sociology and anthropology and history proper and from the sciences. We don't really have our own methodology. We just nick the best ones off other disciplines.
We're a bit of everything.
Yeah, and that's a good thing. Yeah.
Our second question is, what are your main areas of research?
Right. Yes, so I work on the history of psychiatry and neuroscience generally. So I'm interested in sort of anything to do with the sort of mind and brain since the 17th century onwards. So I wrote my PhD thesis on like one particular asylum in Wakefield, where I argue anyway that they kind of developed the modern understanding of the brain. I'm sort of quite interested in how sort of mental health has been historically understood and treated, but how it's been understood scientifically and how that's changed over time. Yeah, that's kind of the main thing that I've worked on. But it's kind of like sort of in recent years has become more student sort of teaching-led research. So you guys are meant to get research-led teaching, like where teachers teach you things that they're researching. But I find my research ends up following the things I teach. So if I'm teaching a module on something, I read more into it and then end up following it that way. Yeah, sort of history of mind and brain and the way sort of medical treatment and looking after patients and science and theories about the mind and brain, how they interact. So that's kind of the main area. Specifically at the moment, I'm very interested in the history of self-help because I think it's sort of everywhere, well-being and self-improvement. And it has a very long history, but it's kind of the advice has changed. It just reflects society in different times, but also it's sort of underpinned by scientific understanding. And I think I find it quite fascinating because actually a lot of history of science, if you find history of science books in like Waterstones or Blackwell's or one of the big bookshops, they're usually lumped in together with like pop psychology and self-help books. So there's this kind of strange sort of link between history of science and self-help in a way. So yeah, that's the kind of more specific thing that I'm interested in or have been for the last year or two. But also history of museums and objects, because I run a museum. So sort of material history of science and sort of how objects can teach us, or how we can learn different things from them and how they were used and how it encourages us to see science as a practice and all those kind of things, especially medical objects. I like. But yeah, you guys know about objects in the museum already, don't you? Yeah. Yeah, that's I think that's it. I'm sure that's enough of my research.
It does sound very interesting, though, all your research.
I think it is. It's definitely not my research specifically, but the topics that I work on are really popular at undergraduate level because it's kind of sort of about how we conceive of ourselves and how scientific thinking informs like our sense of ourselves and how we live and what social problems are and all kinds of things and how we improve our world. But also just mental health is like a subject that's been there in the background but ignored for a long time, and in the last 20 years it's sort of become more widely discussed, and sort of students are interested in the history of it too. So yeah, it's an interesting thing, I think.
Yeah. So sort of following on from that is, how do you get into lecturing, or how did you get into lecturing?
Yeah, I think I always wanted to work in a university, but I thought I was going to be a scientist. And then after I sort of, like, when I was doing my PhD, when I came to Leeds, I did quite a lot of teaching. I don't think you'd get away with it now. I don't think students are allowed to do as much teaching as I did. But I was module leader on a couple of modules, and I tutored on about 10 different modules. And I kind of realised that I preferred teaching to research, which is, I think, is quite unusual. But I really like being in lectures and being in seminar rooms and things. So I did a lot of teaching when I was a PhD student. Then immediately when I finished my PhD, I started working in museums. I had a short postdoc where I was working with Leeds and the Mental Health Museum in Wakefield to sort of help reopen that place and redesign the galleries and the exhibitions in there. And then when that finished, I got a job as science curator in Aberdeen at the university museums there, which was amazing. I really loved that job. I was working in Marshall College, which is like the second largest granite building in the world. It's like this beautiful grey building in the centre of Aberdeen, and the museum was closed at the time. So there was like 4 of us working in this enormous building, just walking around an empty museum, and that was brilliant. At the time I'd applied for that job, I'd also applied for a 1-year sort of fixed-term lecture cover job at Leeds, but I didn't get an interview and had forgotten about it. And then I think I'd been up in Aberdeen for about 4 or 5 weeks, and on one Friday afternoon, someone from Leeds rang me and said, "We're interviewing for that job on Monday, but one of our interviewees has dropped out. Do you want to come and interview for it? It might be a good experience for you." And I thought, well, actually, I was living separately from my girlfriend, now wife, because she was in Leeds and I was sort of 6.5 hours away. So I thought, someone's paying for my train fare to come back to Leeds for the weekend. I might as well do it. And I think I was there just to fill up the numbers for the interview panel. So I had to prepare a presentation and everything over the weekend. And then I did that on a Monday morning. And then I got the job, and I was up against much stronger candidates, but who had books and who were sort of much further along with their career. But I think because it was a teaching post and I'd kind of knew about teaching more than the others rather than research, I ended up getting the job. And so I joined, was it 2013? That was. And then when the person who was running our museum left, I stayed on and took that over, as well as carrying on teaching. And then I've been here for like nearly 8 years now. I'm just coming in as a 1-year cover, and it's only in the last sort of year that I'm being made permanent. But so I've been here quite a while, and I've just kind of fallen into it, mostly again because the things that I work on and teach have been quite popular for undergraduates. So the school's always needed someone to teach those things. Yeah, so that's how I ended up into lecturing. I did want to do it, but also I sort of got a bit lucky with sort of someone dropping out of an interview to give me a chance.
Question 4 is, do you have any advice on how you would go about getting published in a journal?
No. I really don't. I saw that question and I thought, oh, please. I mean, the only I don't know if you the main thing I would say is just whatever you do, just don't do what I've done. Like I have never missed opportunities to publish, and I think I hate not perfectionist, because that sounds like you're sort of praising yourself, but I'm really bad at sort of letting go of work and thinking that it's good enough. So I would say, yeah, just don't do what I do. I think, yeah, it depends what you kind of want to get published. If it's there's this, I really hate that bit about academia, that is publish or perish thing. Like, you have to have articles out there to get a job. And I kind of like the idea of like what academia might have been like 40, 50 years ago, where you didn't have to be like, there were people who liked researching and there were people who liked teaching. So yeah, doing the opposite of what I did would be to treat writing and publishing as an iterative process. So it's not something you just kind of write, submit, and it's done, but kind of preparing yourself for the fact that it's a process of trial and error, that you read a bit, you start writing early, send it to people, friends, colleagues who can give you advice, take their advice on board, read a bit more, write a bit more. Don't wait until it's perfect before you submit it. If you're going to try and get something published, use the reviewers to help improve the work, and then take their advice, I mean, with a pinch of salt, if it's helpful. And don't take it personally, whatever criticisms they have, and then use that and then write it again. But kind of just sort of start writing early, and you need to have a plan, but you don't need to sort of have it perfect before it gets sent off. That's kind of what I would do. But also I would say, if you're on a more practical level, if you write a dissertation and you get a good mark, or your supervisor or anyone suggests to you, like, this could be the basis of a publishable paper, like, take up that opportunity and say, right, well, I'm going to try and do this. Like, I'll look through it again, find the right journal for it, like, try and do a bit of research about like which journals have the most applications or most submissions, and which ones are friendly and helpful reviewers or editors, and then try and sort of model it to the journal that you want to submit it to, and get help from supervisors, people at the university, and just do it, I think, rather than sort of holding on until it's perfect, or holding on until you publish a book or whatever. I think the people who are really successful I think take it that you just need one good idea to publish a paper. And if you have 3 good ideas, that should be 3 papers. So you don't need to try and get everything down in one go. Yeah, but as I said, I'm like the least published person in the world, so just don't follow whatever I've done. That's
still really good advice, though, what you've said.
Is it?
Yeah, feels like good advice.
Yeah. Well, I'm trying to set up a project. And I've had this in mind for like a year or so, but in the 3rd year module that I teach, it's filled with just topics that I'm interested in doing research on. They're all things that I've sort of written a paper on and have never published, most of the lectures. But one of them was a topic that I worked on with a former PhD student of mine, Laura Sellers, which was sort of seeing utilitarian institutions like workhouses, prisons, asylums and hospitals in the 19th century as places of scientific research. So we know that they are horrible places of social control and whatnot, but they're also, because there's so little funding for research in Britain at the time, they become sites of research, but it's not a thing that's being particularly well explored. So every year I set the question to undergraduates, and students have done some like amazing original research. So my plan is to try and turn this into a project where student work can kind of get combined over years, and we can publish it as a kind of research on this topic, because I think it'd be really interesting to the wider world. But yeah, if you write something really good, and someone says, you could publish this, take it as a compliment, but also they won't just be saying it for the sake of it, they'll mean it, and so follow that up and try and get it published. Yeah, I've seen loads of really good dissertations over the years that could be great articles with very little change, but students move on and do other things and then end up not publishing it. Yeah.
Our next few questions are a little bit more informal.
Yeah.
So this next one is, what's your favourite book?
Oh, Yeah, I saw that and I thought, when I was like a teenager, I was one of those annoying kind of people who would ask someone like, what's your favorite band? What's your favorite album? And I know that these are the kind of questions that I would have had like answers prepared for always. Like I'd have a mental list that would sort of update sort of every few weeks, like knowing what your desert island discs would be. But then when you asked me that, I thought, oh God, I don't know. Over the last year, we started a reading group with some friends, and I've ended up reading more fiction over lockdown than I had in like the previous 10 years. So now I'm only just starting to get into books again. I think when you spend all day reading stuff on the computer, you just get sick of reading. So anyway, yeah, favorite book. In terms of, I thought getting into history of science, I took it down off my shelf. When I first started doing history of science, I read this book, and I still think it's my favorite history of science book, and that's The Lunar Men by Jenny Uglaw. And it's about Erasmus Darwin and just Wedgwood and Priestley and all of these kind of figures in the Midlands in the sort of late 18th century who formed a lunar society. They used to like meet on full moon, so they had the light of the moon to walk home to, and they were kind of like engineers and scientists and entrepreneurs and doctors. And well, the subtitle is The Friends Who Made the Future, but it's like sort of a nice story about the Industrial Revolution from the perspective of this kind of group of people. Well, I love that book because it's history of science and it's really detailed, but it's like enjoyable to read. And most history of science is awful to read. So actually, that would be, in answer to the earlier question, the other thing about writing and publishing is don't try and write like the things that you read, because most published articles are badly written. Try and write nicely and in your own voice, and that's what this does. It's like it's a kind of fun, I don't want to say fun, but it's like an enjoyable narrative, and it's written kind of in a literate way. And I really love that book, and it's kind of always been my model of like, if I write, that's what I want it to be like. I want it to be worth reading and enjoyable to read. But I thought there's that, but then I don't want to seem like a sort of massive nerd whose only books are history of science books. But I can't really think what I thought like there's two. So I'm not following the rules at all. But I thought there's two books that I would say like my favorite. Well, they're not fit. Well, one's fiction, one's non-fiction, but two favorite non-history of science books. One is Middlemarch by George Eliot, which is a beast and is a kind of like the quotidian everyday life of rural Britain. I love that. I like just kind of getting lost in it, or I did when I read it. And then the other book is Beyond a Boundary, which is a book by actually I'm not sure where it's from, C.L.R. James. So he's a West Indian Marxist historian, social commentator and cricketer, and it's a book about cricket, like, but also about sort of society and racism and sort of 20th century socialism and history, and it's a book about sport, but it's not really, and it's also sort of widely seen as like the best book about sport ever written. So those are my two favorite like non-academic books. But the thing is, like, both of them I read like quite a while ago, and then over the last couple of years tried thinking I'll read them again, and I never got very far. So I don't know if I'm imagining them as better than they were, or whether I just can't bring myself to read something twice. Yeah, I don't know if you guys have you been doing lockdown reading much?
Yeah, quite a bit. Yeah.
Anything good?
I've been reading a lot of the Star Wars books. They're quite good.
Who are they by?
There's a load of authors behind them. They've got some new ones coming out at the minute, but there's loads.
Yeah. Okay. And Dave, have you read anything interesting?
I've just started reading the Sherlock Holmes books. That's my next kind of like thing that I'm going to do, because I like bought all of them ages ago, but then just never got round to it. So I'm finally getting around to that. I'm enjoying it. That's well.
Yeah, I did the Sherlock Holmes ones as audio book, kind of.
Oh yeah.
Listening to actually I do listen to quite a lot of audiobooks, but kind of 10 minutes before you fall asleep on a night, just kind of set the timer so it won't play like throughout the night after you've fallen asleep. Yeah, it's a good thing to go back on. I like sci-fi as well, but I haven't read any for a while. I think over the last year we read quite a lot of classic fiction with my friends, and I realized I like old things and I like things set in Yorkshire. But I really love Beloved as well, even though that was haunting, but a really great book. I really hated Love in a Time of Cholera. I don't know if you've read that before. Yeah, Gabriel Garcia Marquez. I read what's his other book? Can't remember. I'd read another book by him and thought it was brilliant. 100 Years of Solitude. Yeah. But then read Love in a Time of Cholera and thought it was a big pile. Yeah, did not like that at all. Yeah, but anyway, I didn't give a simple or clear answer, but yeah, there you go.
That's fine. Our next question sort of follows on from that. What's your favourite film?
So, yeah, again, I don't know. I think so a friend of mine pointed out, there's a lot of films that I end up not liking that are good films. And he said it's something to do with like your Catholic upbringing, that I can't cope with like films where kind of with like relativistic morality, or where like bad people go unpunished or good people suffer. I really struggle with those kind of like, not that I need a happy ending, but I can't hack films where like I'm not good at characters where you're like, are they good, are they bad, who knows, everyone's a bit of both. Like, no, I want very clear good and bad characters. But no, I thought I basically, I don't know why, when I read books I'm quite happy to read sort of arty, sophisticated, complex books, but when I watch films I often think I just want to be entertained for a couple of hours. So I really like rom-coms. So I say I love 10 Things I Hate About You and Grosse Pointe Blank, but also like musicals. So like West Side Story, maybe. I think that would probably be a film I could watch again and again, or Singing in the Rain or something like that. Yeah. Are those films that either of you have seen?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Singing in the Rain. That's one of my favorites as well. So I'd agree with you on the musicals front.
Yeah, the dream sequence halfway through, it's like sort of 15 minutes of the best cinema ever made. Yeah, but also sort of they're all kind of sort of soppy, not soppy, but they kind of have a sort of strong moral to them.
Oh yeah, they're always pretty clean cut, nice people.
Yeah. Are you guys rom-com fans?
Not really, no.
Okay. I'm always on the lookout for recommendations.
Yeah, it's like one of those ones where like I don't mind watching a rom-com, but like I wouldn't say that I've seen enough of them that. But like When Harry Met Sally and Groundhog Day are like two of my favorite films. So
yeah,
I'm a big fan of that kind of stuff.
There's a golden period of like through the late 80s and 90s.
Yeah, definitely.
Where a lot of the great ones, well, a lot of the ones that I really like came out. Yeah. Yeah. But what's your favorite film?
Me?
Yeah.
Oh, I really like sci-fi films. So it's going to be somewhere from that genre. So
sci-fi, but not necessarily superhero.
Yeah, not necessarily superheroes, but really love sci-fi.
Right. What would be an example? It doesn't have to be the favourite. But...
Oh, I've got to say, one of the original trilogy Star Wars has got to be up there. Love them. Yeah. So good.
Yeah. And Dave, sorry, yeah.
Mine is a film called LA Confidential, which is from the 90s, which is slightly less well known, and I'm yet to meet too many people who have actually seen it, but yeah. I'm a very big fan.
Yeah, I think when I sort of in the year between doing my undergraduate degree and my master's, I think I remember getting like the 100 greatest movies ever thing and just working my way through them over the course. So before I sort of got a job, I was either just sort of hanging around with my friend or on a driving range or sort of watching films at 3 a.m. So I worked my way through them. So yeah, that is a good film. I did like that. I remember probably what is that? It's Michelle Pfeiffer, isn't it?
No, Kim Basinger.
Kim Basinger, that's it. Yeah,
close enough.
Jeez. Yeah. I have a vague memory of seeing that a long time ago. Yeah. I really loved The Dig. That's just come out on Netflix.
Is that the one with Ray Fiennes?
Ray Fiennes and Carey Mulligan. Yeah, it's nice. I recommend that. Yeah. Sorry. Anyway, I'll let you get to the questions.
So the next one is, if you could travel anywhere in time, where would you go and why?
Yeah, I was watching in lockdown, I've been paying to watch like online stand-up gigs because support the community, but also stand-up comedy is kind of what I like watching. And they asked this question to a group of people, and British people always seem to answer the 1960s, like 1966. England win the World Cup, the Beatles are out, Flower Power. So I don't know if that's what everyone else goes for. But I think I don't really know, but I think probably like back to the early 19th century, like 1810, maybe 20s, 30s, sort of just before Victoria's time. But to sort of in the kind of northern towns and Midlands, like to see what the sort of British country was like before, like as it was changing, as the landscape was changing, as all these buildings and structures were going up. I think it'd be horrible and miserable, and you'd get like cut a finger and die from infection. But is it? I don't. Yeah, I should have checked. I should have been asking about the question. Is it like, so if I go back, do I have to live there for a year, or am I just a spirit watching, or do I have to actually live and have a job in that time? If I go back, can I stay as a white man, or do I have to go back as well, if I was anything else other than this, life would be a lot harder. So yeah, I don't. And obviously, going back to that time period, it would be horrible in lots of different ways. But I think, I sort of early sort of industrializing period, sort of just to see how the sort of landscapes were changing. And I think I always, when I was younger, I remember people would always say, if you were alive years ago, because I was quite tall at the time for my age, you'd be working on a farm. You'd be a strong lad working on the farm. So I was thinking, I don't want to go back in time because I just have to work on a farm. But I think that's when I'd go back to so just basically where I am now, but just 200 years ago. Yeah.
How different do you think it would be going back to like where you live now back then?
Round here, so I live out in the Aire Valley. Well, actually, it'd be really exciting here because Bingley, the town that I live in, they've got the 5 rise locks. It's like the point of the sort of Leeds-Liverpool Canal where it really steps up into the Pennines. And I think this is a town that made its money on sort of investing in the canal and then charging people to use it. So it would have been quite a sort of and it was around about, it was early 19th century, late 18th, early 19th century when it was built. So it would have been like a lot of time of building and engineering, and sort of quite exciting, I think. West Yorkshire, this is like the sort of heart of the Industrial Revolution. Well, that canal taking like coals and wool and cottons and all kinds of materials in each direction. But I don't think you would see the excitement, though, would you? No. If you would just be working, and I'm sure the food wouldn't be that good, and it's always muddy. It'd be nice to see what it looked like before they chopped all the trees down. There's quite a few woods around here, but back when the landscape was like still 80% forests or whatever, I think that would have been if you sort of walk through a forest or woods when it's a bit dark, whether it's like early morning or on an evening just before dusk, you kind of feel like, oh, this is what it must have been like to have been some kind of a medieval serf or something, sort of walking to work or moving around land, because you kind of just are lost and you can't imagine anything else. Yeah, but yeah, I think, I don't know what it would have been. I think this is probably sort of nice out here. It probably flooded less then as well. Yeah, it might be. I think we probably would have had some of the smoking chimneys, but not we're a bit far away from the sort of centre of Bradford and Leeds to have been too smoggy. Yeah. Is that really? I don't know if that's a weird. I'm going to analyse this afterwards. What does that say about me? I don't want to see people. I just want to sort of stand and look at the landscape. Yeah.
Our next question is, if you could have a conversation with any dead person, who would you choose and why?
Yeah, I thought, again, with this, I thought, my first thought was no one, because so often when you read history or about people, you're like, they're all awful. Like 99% of people from the past that were worthy, that anything's been written about, they'll have had some aspect of their character or their personality that makes you think, I don't want to know them, or I wouldn't want to hang out with them. So it's a difficult one. I'm not. So I mentioned at the beginning Erasmus Darwin. Maybe him, because he was like doctor, poet, inventor, developed his own independent idea of evolution. Oh, I think my dog's barking. So possibly him, or George Eliot, maybe sort of Mary Ann Evans lived through that kind of exciting period in British history, interested in science, great writer. But yeah, I don't think, I'm sure I could name lots of people that I would like just to ask questions for research, just to be like, hang on, where did you publish this? And can you just clarify what your ideas on sort of cerebral localization are and things like that. But in terms of getting to know historical figures, I'm not sure that I would like them, but maybe you could learn a lot from them. But yeah, I'm gonna go for George Eliot. I think, yeah, she seems smart and likable.
What's the first question you think you'd ask them?
Oh, that's a good one. Well, did she really hate Leeds as much as she said, and why? So she properly slagged off Leeds. So whether or not we could convince her otherwise. Where's she from? She's from Nuneaton, Midlands. Like, is that really that better? But I kind of would be interested. I'm sort of interested in how people think things were going. So she was very interested in sort of psychological science and science more generally. Like, it'd be interesting to get people's predictions from the past and see how much of what they thought would happen actually did happen. Yeah.
Next question. What would you tell any new students joining the universities over the next few years?
Ooh, yeah, that's difficult, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because it's a difficult time to be in a university or to be sort of defending a university, because it seems like universities are sort of under attack from all angles. I said this week, was it yesterday or the day before, the sort of free speech commissioner has been appointed. On the one hand, from one side, people are complaining universities are places where you can't say what you think and there's no free speech and they're too woke, whatever that is. And then on the other side, people are criticising them for being like marketised neoliberal nightmares and all of that kind of thing. And I kind of have, like, I wanted to work in a university because I had this kind of idealised idea of what universities can be, like these beacons of learning, of bringing people from different parts of the world together, tackling big problems, pushing knowledge beyond the boundaries of wherever it's been before. So I guess the first thing would be to say to students, thinking about or planning to join a university is to keep the faith in universities as good places, because they're under such scrutiny and so regularly criticised at the moment. And we know they're not perfect. We know there's lots of problems, as there is with anything. But I think holding on to the idea of what universities should be for and can be for, and when they're at their best, what amazing places to be part of and what they contribute. Yeah, hopefully you guys agree with that. I don't know, yeah. Just a nod, yeah, no. So that would be one thing, is like to sort of remember what universities are for. It's more than just kind of to get a certificate, to get a job at the end. I think the other thing is when you come to university, to sort of to follow your interests while you're here. So I think university, it's hard. It doesn't matter who you are. Studying at university is hard work, but it's fun. But it's a lot harder if you're not doing something that you really want to do in the first place. If you're doing the subject you think you ought to do for a career, or because someone recommended it to you, and it's not what you're actually passionate about, it's a lot harder. So find the things that you care about and do that. Don't worry about whether it's sort of the most respectable or the most kind of prestigious subject. All subjects matter, all things are important if you care about them and do it properly. But the other thing would be to take advantage of all of the kind of opportunities while you're at university, that so many people from different places together, full of ideas and optimism. And so whether it's joining sort of societies and clubs or sports teams and things like that, or volunteering, just meeting new people, the older you get, you just don't get those opportunities anymore. Like all of the things that are just at your fingertips when you're at university, once you start in a normal career and working every day and family and all that kind of thing, you just don't have those opportunities anymore. So take advantage of them and try everything. Find the things that you like, because if you get into a group or a sport or an activity beyond your studies while you're at uni, it'll stick with you once you leave as well. These are interests that you can keep going for the rest of your life. So try as much out, especially when it's free. Try things out. And then when it comes to studying, I mean, it's hard because it's different for everyone. And I think one thing staff probably notice more and more as every year goes by is that students arrive at university from school, sixth forms, colleges, with an idea of like learning as, what do I need to know and include in my essay to get a first or to get a 2-1? And that's not how university works. It's not like if you remember these things and mention these terms, then you get this mark, which is how often you prepare for exams at A-level or GCSE. It's about thinking for yourself and developing your own ideas and your own points of view, and interpreting and engaging with readings and what your lecturers or tutors have said, and thinking about them for yourself. So be aware that university, the way we learn and the way we sort of go about studying isn't the same as school if you're just sort of arriving here. But make the most of that. Don't see that as a, so I know that can be a bit scary for some people to think, okay, but what do I need to do to get a good grade? What do I need to include? And I'd say try to focus on the process, on reading and enjoying and learning from the readings, or from sort of engaging in lectures and seminars, and not being embarrassed about not knowing something or getting something wrong, because that's what everything's there for, is to help you learn and develop. But also, if you kind of just focus on like assignments, the essay that you've got due in a few weeks, or what grade you need to get, I think you kind of stop just enjoying learning for its own sake and stop just taking things in. Everything is just kind of instrumental rather than contributing to your own development and knowledge. So you can still get good grades and do really well by, rather than thinking about deadlines and assessments, just by being in the moment and enjoying the thing you're working on and doing it properly, and then stopping when it gets to 5 o'clock in the evening and having fun with friends and going out. Well, no, not at the moment, watching Netflix. But yeah, focus on the process of learning and engaging with things rather than sort of just thinking about deadlines and outcomes. I mean, obviously life will be easier if you've got a 2-1 or a first, but at the end of it. But also once you do make that jump into a career, a first job, your grades don't stop mattering anymore. And then you're left with, but what else did I get from university beside the grade? And if you've not got involved in those groups and societies and not really taken anything else from the degree, it's kind of been a bit of a wasted opportunity. So try and enjoy it, and the grades and the successes will come from just focusing on what's in front of you and enjoying that bit by bit. I think you can tell that I study self-help, can't you?
There's some good advice there. I think that would be very helpful. Our last question is, what's your number one piece of advice you'd give to any student?
I guess, yeah. Do you? Yes, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy is don't panic, or is that Dad's Army? I think, in the sense of, and it's when someone is stressed about something or worried or anxious about something in the moment, often the worst advice you give is don't be. Are you sad? Don't be sad. But it's to kind of say, like, whatever it is, like if there's an immediate problem that you're struggling with work, you have that internal worry and anxiety and stress, but then just ask for help, and people will help you, and things will get better. It's like it's never too late to, like, reach out and ask for help from someone, and to sort of come up with a new plan and to get things done. And in terms of, like, whether it's working through your degree or even after you leave university and go on to further study or whatever it might be, if things aren't kind of progressing immediately as you sort of hoped for, don't panic. That you can still get to where you want to be eventually. You can still finish the task you're working on or get the job that you want or the career you want, even if the path there isn't kind of like high flyer straight into the job. Sometimes it's a bit of a windy route to get to where you want to be, but as long as you're making progress and you're happy with what you're doing in the meantime, you can just keep going and working towards where you want to be. And there's no prize at the end for, like, sort of getting to the job you want within a year of your degree, as long as, yeah. I look at a lot of people that with interesting careers and think they took 10, 20 years after university before they ended up doing that. I think, yeah, that's how it often is. So yeah, don't panic if you're not there straight away. But also when you're in university and everything, when you're in the midst of a sort of major stress, panic for a second, but then stop and think, what do I need to do? Who can help me? Yeah, and then sort of reach out for help and make a plan, because it's never too late to do something about it. That is sort of one piece of advice, but it's interpreted in a couple of different ways. So again, I cheated, but yeah.
Yeah, it's good advice nonetheless.
Yeah. My dad's piece of advice to me was just, like, make sure that you like what you're doing, because whatever you do, you'll be doing it for like 40 or 50 years. So find something you actually like doing. Yeah,
things are easier when you like it.
Yeah, and then there's loads of extra bits of that. It's like, I think I was probably quite a snob when I was a teenager, like what was a good career, what was a worthwhile thing to do. But actually, as long as you enjoy it and it's not harming other people, then it's fine. Like, whatever you're in, everything has value and worth. So yeah. I did make notes for this question, did I? Yeah, actually, I said what I'd written. Yeah. Yeah.
So that's the end of our questions. Thank you very much for interviewing with us today.
You're welcome. That was enlightening.